You are a hypocrite, Lawrence, Didi snapped. You said you were not interested in him. In who? Lawrence asked, genuinely confused. Kelvin, Didi yelled, her face flushed with frustration. Lawrence had never seen her friend this mad before. But you rejected him, Didi, Lawrence replied, trying to stay calm. Not just once, but 3 times. So why are you angry at me? Because you did not give me time to process my feelings, and you didn't even tell me he was rich. Do you believe in love and fate? Well, I believe these 2 elements are intertwined in a way. If you believe in love and love, then get a glass of fresh juice or any snack you find delicious and enjoy this beautiful story. Divine, fondly called Didi, and Lawrence had been inseparable since their high school days. The girls were bonded by a friendship that seemed unshakable despite their different upbringings. Didi was the princess of the Oba family, pampered and sheltered as the only daughter among 2 elder brothers. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oba, were strong figures in the community. Her mother ran the most successful fabric store in the big Onitsha main market, and her father owned the largest wine shop along with a popular minibar. In the Oba household, money was not a worry. Didi was given everything she desired. Her life was a curated bubble of comfort and ease. Lawrence, on the other hand, had grown up in a house where hard work was not an option. It was a necessity. As the second of 6 children, she learned early from her elder sister how to hustle. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ago, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Mrs. Ago ran a modest food shop in the neighborhood, while Mr. Ago took long shifts as a driver for a local production company. Life in the Ago household was far from glamorous, but it was grounded in resilience and survival, values Lawrence embodied with pride. Yet, despite the contrast in their backgrounds, Didi and Lawrence found balance and loved each other so dearly, in ways that no one else could understand. During their early days in the university, Didi's parents made sure she had everything she needed, including a very comfortable apartment off campus. As soon as the lease was signed, Didi, who knew the financial state of her best friend, extended an invitation to Lawrence. And Lawrence, who truly had been juggling financial pressures, was deeply grateful. Moving in with Didi not only eased her burdens, but also solidified their friendship. Didi was equally happy to have Lawrence around, but not just for companionship. Having Lawrence there meant she was covered academically. Lawrence, the intelligent one of the 2, took care of everything: assignments, attendance, and even managing Didi's final year project when the time came. It became some kind of unspoken agreement between them. While Didi ensured they lived comfortably, Lawrence handled the academic grind, making sure Didi sailed through without much effort. Life continued to move smoothly for the girls until they reached their final year. But one day, something happened that would shake the solid bond that these girls had. The final stretch of university was grueling for Lores. She was carrying the weight of two people, managing her own coursework along with Didi's. Exhausted from lectures and running errands, she would come home drained, only to face the responsibility of cooking. Cooking had never been Didi's thing, and on days when Lores was too tired, Didi's solution was always the same: let's just eat out. But Lores had no choice. Aside the fact that she loved Didi, she knew that it was only logical to do whatever she could for Didi, since she was technically giving her food, shelter, took care of her textbook expenses, and whatever could keep them comfortable. One evening, as Lores dragged her weary feet towards their lodge, she spotted Didi standing at the gate, waving with an excited smile on her face. "Finally, I'm starving," Didi said, making a pitiful face as Lores approached. Lores chuckled softly, despite her exhaustion. "Then why are you standing out here?" "I'm hungry," Didi pouted. Lores smiled, shaking her head. "Alright, let's go upstairs and I'll fix you something to eat." But before Lores could even finish her sentence, Didi grabbed her arm and started pulling her towards a waiting taxi. "No way. I can't wait for you to start cooking. Let's go out and get something to eat. I'm hungry." Lores sighed, too tired to argue, and letting herself be dragged into the cab. Lores and Didi stopped at a small eatery, the comforting smell of fried food and spices hitting them as they walked in. They placed their order and sat down to wait. As usual, Didi could not stop talking. She launched into a long-winded story about how many guys had stopped her on the way, hoping to get her attention. "You know these guys, they just can't help themselves," Didi said, flipping her hair dramatically. "I mean, let's be real. If a guy does not have money, what is he even doing talking to me? Looks are nice, I get it, but the pocket matters the most." She grinned, clearly pleased with herself. "I know I'm pretty, so of course, they'll all want my contact." It was true. Didi was a striking black girl. Her tall, slim frame and smooth skin always turned heads. Her confidence only added to her appeal. Every time they went out, it wasn't uncommon for men to stop and try their luck with her. But Didi was full of herself. She did not see a man as worthy of her attention if he was not fully loaded and reeking of wealth. Lores, however, was too exhausted to engage, her head nodding along without much interest. She was worn from the day, and Didi's endless stories felt like background noise. When the food finally arrived, she wasted no time. She pounced on her meal, barely looking up, while Didi, in contrast, continued talking as she delicately picked her food, her voice never lowering as she recounted every detail of her day. Suddenly, Loris's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was her sister, Linda. She answered in her usual composed manner, but the scream that came from the other end sent a shiver down her spine. "Daddy is in the hospital. Where are you?" Loris nearly choked on her food as panic washed over her. She jumped to her feet, and Didi followed immediately, sensing something was terribly wrong. "Hospital?" Loris gasped in disbelief as they quickly boarded a taxi and rushed to the hospital. When they arrived, Loris's mother was sitting outside looking frustrated and worn out. Lawrence walked over to her, trying to stay calm. "What is the problem?" she asked. Her mother shook her head bitterly. "I don't know. No one has said anything to us." Just then, Linda came out of the hospital. The moment she saw Lawrence, she grabbed her hand and pulled her to a quieter spot, where their mother would not overhear. Didi followed close behind, not wanting to leave Lawrence's side. "We need to pay a deposit," Linda whispered urgently. "The doctor said Daddy's creatinine levels are high. It could damage his kidneys if we don't act fast." Lawrence leaned against the wall, her legs weak from the weight of the news. Didi stood frozen, realizing just how serious the situation was. "I borrowed some money for the deposit so they could start treatment, but we'll need more for the next round of expenses," Linda continued. After leaving the hospital, Lawrence returned to school completely drained. Her mind was a whirlwind of worry and frustration. The moment they arrived at their hostel, she collapsed onto the bed and burst into tears. Didi was not blind to her friend's ordeal. In fact, she worried as much as her friend did. For Mr. Ago had also been like a father to her. The money that was needed was huge, way above what she could afford. "Don't worry," she said calmly to her friend, who was still in tears. "We'll find a way, I promise." The next day, Didi, who had gone out earlier in the morning, came back late in the evening, her face a mix of hesitation and urgency. She found Lawrence lying on the bed, her body limp with exhaustion and worry. She knelt down beside her friend, wrapping her arms gently around Lawrence's shoulders. "I think I've found a way for us to earn quick money," Didi whispered, her voice low and unsure. "But it might not sit well with you once you hear it." Lawrence sat up on the bed, her eyes wide and alert. "Just say it, Didi. My father's health is very important to me, and I can do anything to make things better," she said, her voice sharp, her gaze piercing into Didi's. Desperation colored every word. Didi took a deep breath, fidgeting as she looked away for a moment. "I talked to one of my guys. He said that if we want to earn enough money within 3 days, then you could try working at a club." Lawrence's mouth fell open in shock. "Work at a club? Doing what exactly?" she asked, sarcasm slipping into her voice as she sat up straighter, her tone sharp. "Selling smiles, dancing, just stuff," Didi muttered, avoiding eye contact. She wasn't spelling it out, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Lawrence's face tightened, her breath catching in her throat. "Didi, are you seriously asking me to sell my body for money in a club?" "Look, stripping doesn't mean you have to sell your body," Didi said, her voice soft yet persuasive. "Just smile, dance, and entertain the clients. Sleeping with them is a choice, and no one is going to force you." Lawrence sat quietly. "I don't know, Didi," she mumbled after a moment, trying to picture herself in that environment. "I talked to the guy who owns the place," Didi continued, undeterred. "He said the daily pay is good. If you work for just a week, you'll have more than enough to help your dad. It's quick money, Lawrence." Lawrence bit her lip, Her family was in dire need of this money right now, and her sister Linda had been carrying the burden for too long. She knew she had to step up, but this felt like too big a leap. So, when do I start? Loris asked, still filled with hesitation, but feeling trapped by the circumstances. Tonight, Didi replied with a smile. That's what he told me, but don't worry, I'll be there with you for the first week. Until you get used to it, you won't be alone, I promise. She reached out and gently patted Loris's hair, as if trying to comfort her. Loris nodded slowly, but her mind was still racing. Didi, skilled at makeup artistry, carefully worked on Loris's face, transforming her look with precise strokes and colors. Though Loris wasn't unattractive to begin with, her natural beauty had often gone unnoticed due to her reserved lifestyle. She had a fine complexion, a slim build, and average height, and her charm became more evident whenever she made the effort to groom herself and wear clothes that complemented her figure. After finishing the makeup, Didi rummaged through her wardrobe and selected some of her best gowns, eager to find the perfect one for Loris. They tried on several until they found the one that fit her like a glove. Elegant and just bold enough to draw the right kind of attention. Loris looked into the mirror, a flicker of uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. But Didi's excitement was infectious. Soon, they were dressed and ready to face the night. The nightlife scene at the club was a familiar territory for Didi, with a wide circle of male friends and a taste for adventure. She frequented these places. Clubs were her playground, where she navigated effortlessly through flashing lights and booming music. But for Loris, this was uncharted territory. As they stepped out of the taxi, the thumping bars from inside the club made Loris feel a nervous flutter in her stomach. Sensing her friend's discomfort, Didi leaned closer. Come on, Loris, give it your best. Trust me, you'll be fine. As they approached the entrance, a familiar figure greeted them. It was Mike, one of Didi's many acquaintances. He smiled warmly and gave Loris an appreciative once-over. Is this the girl you were talking about? He asked Didi, clearly impressed. Yes, this is her, Didi confirmed with a proud smile. Isn't she gorgeous? Loris felt a bit self-conscious under Mike's gaze, but managed a small smile. Didi took her by the hand, tugging her gently towards the heart of the club. Let's go, she urged. Loris stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding as the music and flashing lights overwhelmed her senses. Everything about this place felt foreign, too loud, too fast, and too chaotic. The decision to work here had been a desperate one, spurred by her father's deteriorating health and the high cost of his medication. Now that she was actually inside, doubts flooded her mind. Could she really go through with this? Sensing Loris's hesitation, Didi gave her an encouraging smile and gently clasped her hand. Come on. It's easier than you think, she whispered reassuringly. Together, they made their way into the VIP section, where the crowd thinned and the atmosphere felt slightly more manageable. In this exclusive area, the clientele was smaller and more refined. Wealthy men in designer suits, lounging on plush seats ordering expensive bottles of champagne. "Just smile and relax," Didi instructed, her voice calm but firm. "Let them hold your hand or touch you if they want. Serve the drinks, sway to the music, and look approachable. It's all about making them feel comfortable, not about doing anything you're not okay with." Loris nodded, inhaling deeply to steady her nerves. Following Didi's example, she moved gracefully, flashing polite smiles at the men who reached for her and called her over to pour drinks. Occasionally, one of them would tug her close for a brief dance, and although it felt uncomfortable at first, she reminded herself to keep going. The hours slipped by surprisingly quickly, and by the end of the night, Loris found herself seated at the bar, exhausted but relieved. As promised, she was handed her pay on the spot. When she opened the envelope and saw the amount inside, her breath hitched. It was more than she had expected, more than enough money to buy her father's medication, at least for a few days. If she worked just a few more nights, she could afford everything he needed to stabilize his condition. The thought gave her a bittersweet sense of relief. The pay was good, almost too good to walk away immediately, but as much as she needed the money, the club's atmosphere gnawed at her. 3 weeks, she whispered to herself, as if making a pact. That's all I need. She would endure it just long enough to buy the medicines and ensure her father's health was back on track. Then she would leave and never look back. This was not a permanent solution. It was just a means to an end. Loris continued juggling the exhausting demands of working at the club with the mental strain of preparing for her final exams. Every free moment she had was spent reading, whether on the bus, during breaks, or in the quiet corners of the club before shifts began. She knew her friend Didi had no interest in studying. She relied on Loris to carry the academic weight for the both of them, and the pressure was beginning to take its toll on Loris. She kept reminding herself that there was only a week left at the club. Soon, the burden would ease, and she could finally rest. Meanwhile, her father was not yet fully recovered, but he was on his way to recovery. He was getting the full medical attention that was needed, all thanks to Loris. However, her family had no idea what she had done to raise the money. When her mother asked her, she said she had taken a loan from Didi and would pay back gradually when she got a job. Loris was brought up in a Christian home and thought not to lie, and she never lied to her parents. But this secret would break their hearts if they ever found out. Therefore, she would have to live with it forever. After the exams ended, Didi, in her typical carefree manner, decided to reward Loris. She invited her to one of their favorite mini eateries, a rare treat that she knew that Loris cherished. As usual, Loris enjoyed her meal quietly, listening to Didi's animated gossip about the latest events in their lives. Just as Loris was savoring her food, a young man approached their table. He was well-dressed in a casual outfit, had a confident demeanor, and carried himself with an easy charm. "Hi," he greeted warmly, his eyes landing on Didi. "I'm Kelvin. What's your name?" Didi, who had already assessed him in a glance from head to toe, barely looked interested. "Didi," she replied flatly, and turned back to Lawrence to continue her conversation. Despite the cold response, Kelvin smiled. "I see you are busy," he said politely, undeterred. "Can I get your phone number?" Didi shot him a sharp look, her expression brimming with impatience. "Look, I know where this is going and I'm not interested," she said curtly. "My attitude should have told you that already." Lawrence, feeling awkward, tapped Didi lightly, trying to soften her friend's tone. But Kelvin remained composed, as if her rudeness did not faze him. "I'm not giving up," he said, flashing a warm smile. "I've seen you two here twice before, but I did not get a chance to talk to you the first time. Now, at least, you know my name." With that, he gave a friendly nod and walked away without pressing further. Didi rolled her eyes dramatically, clearly unimpressed, and resumed her conversation as if nothing had happened. Lawrence glanced at her friend with a smile. "You did not have to be so harsh, you know," she said softly. "Oh, don't start, Lawrence," Didi responded with a playful smirk. "You're feeling bad because I snubbed him, right?" She leaned in conspiratorially. "Look, I already sized him up the moment he walked in. He doesn't meet my standards." "But he wasn't bad looking now," Lawrence offered, trying to reason. "He had a good height and he seemed polite." Didi cut her off with a chuckle. "Sure, but he did not look like he has my kind of money," she said, making a joke of it. "I need love, Lawrence, but more importantly, I need money." The two friends burst into laughter, the awkward moment quickly forgotten. They finished their food, still giggling over Didi's antics, and made their way back to their lodge. For Lawrence, it was just another day with Didi. Her bluntness, humor, and refusal to settle never failed to amuse her. And though Didi's attitude towards Kelvin might have seemed a bit harsh, but Lawrence knew it was just Didi being Didi, unapologetically herself. 4 years in the university had finally come to an end, and Lawrence decided it was time to go home and find a good way to support her family. Life had taken a hard turn ever since her father fell ill and was forced to quit his job as a driver for the local production company. With one less income, the family struggled to make ends meet. Her elder sister Linda had to step up to take the financial responsibility of providing for their younger brothers. Lawrence knew she needed to contribute too, especially now that she had finished school. As soon as she arrived home, Lawrence applied to teach at a nearby primary school while waiting for her national service posting. The teaching job would not pay much, but it was something. Every little bit helped ease the burden on her family. After school hours, she would lend a hand to her mother in her small shop in the evenings, selling provisions to the locals. Her presence became a great relief to her mother, who now had some time to rest after long, exhausting days. Meanwhile, Didi remained at her rented apartment, never really visiting her family. Even when she did, she never stayed longer than a week. Home felt like a prison to Didi. To her, returning meant giving up the lifestyle she loved. No partying, no fancy outings, and no mingling with rich men. Her carefree attitude was fueled by the financial support her parents continued to provide. Despite her absence, Didi's mother, who had always indulged her daughter's whims, still sent money regularly, whether she came home or not. It was easier for Didi to avoid questions from her brothers about her whereabouts by staying far from home. Finally, the long-awaited news arrived. Lawrence and Didi were both posted to the capital city of Abuja for their national service. It felt like a new chapter in their lives, full of excitement and possibilities. Didi's parents, ever eager to ensure her comfort, wasted no time securing a well-furnished apartment for her. True to her nature, Didi kept collecting funds from her parents until she had the apartment tailored perfectly to her taste. And again, she invited Lawrence to live with her. And Lawrence, who was overwhelmed with gratitude, accepted. Didi's generosity and unwavering support had always felt like a lifeline. In her toughest moments, Didi had been there, steady and dependable, a source of comfort, like a warm spring, soothing her soul. She knew Didi genuinely cared for her, and the thought of starting this new chapter together made her heart swell with joy. When Lawrence arrived at Didi's apartment in Abuja, she felt a wave of relief and excitement. It had been a long journey, but seeing her lively friend again made it all worth it. Didi greeted her with uncontained enthusiasm, immediately pulling her into a whirlwind of gossip. "Girl, you missed a lot," Didi began dramatically, her hands flying as she narrated her latest adventures. She recounted how she had broken up with her most recent boyfriend and with equal excitement announced her newest catch. "Lawrence, this guy has money," she exclaimed, her eyes gleaming as if to emphasize the importance of that detail. She struck an exaggerated pose and continued, "Oh my God, the things he has bought for me already, you can't even imagine." Lawrence smiled. She was used to Didi's antics. She loved how carefree and free-spirited her friend was. Though they were so different, Lawrence preferring quiet moments, while Didi thrived in life's chaos. They shared a bond that had weathered years of ups and downs. After Lawrence had settled in and refreshed herself, Didi suggested they grab something to eat, and Lawrence, who was still exhausted from the long journey, agreed without hesitation. They hailed a taxi and headed to an eatery not far from the new neighborhood, chatting along the way. Once inside the restaurant, they placed their usual orders and settled in. As they waited for their food, a familiar face approached their table. "Hi, Didi," the young man greeted with a warm smile. Didi blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off by the fact that he knew her name. Lawrence studied the man, her memory clicking into place. She had seen him before. "Kelvin," the man added, as if to jog Didi's memory. At that moment, Didi realized who he was. She quickly scanned him from head to toe, as was her habit, evaluating his appearance and demeanor. "Oh, it's you," she said reluctantly, her tone flat but not entirely dismissive. "Mind if I join you?" Kelvin asked politely. Didi hesitated for a brief second, but then flashed a quick smile, realizing that having him at their table might not be such a bad idea after all, especially if it meant he might pay the bills. "Sure," she said with newfound friendliness, gesturing towards an empty chair. Kelvin joined them and they began eating. Throughout the meal, he made small attempts to engage Didi in conversation, but she responded half-heartedly, answering some questions and ignoring the others. Still, Kelvin remained patient and polite, undeterred by her indifference. When the meal ended, Kelvin picked up the bill without hesitation. Didi, pleased with the outcome, shot him a brief thanks before quickly bolting for the exit, leaving Loris behind to finish the formalities. Loris turned to Kelvin with an apologetic smile. "Thank you so much for the meal," she said sincerely. "You're welcome," Kelvin replied as they walked out of the eatery together. "You two seem to have been friends for a very long time." "Yes, sir," Loris responded with a polite nod. Kelvin hesitated for a moment, then spoke cautiously. "I was wondering, since you are really close to Didi, do you think you could help me? I'd really like to get to know her better." His tone was respectful, almost pleading. Loris gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I'll talk to her," she promised. Just then, Kelvin reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I would like to stay in touch with you," he said, handing it over to her. "Maybe you can let me know how things go." Loris accepted the card graciously. "I'll text you if there's any progress," she assured him. "And thanks again for the meal." Kelvin smiled, grateful for her kindness. As Loris turned toward the taxi, she spotted Didi, already sitting in the back seat, scrolling through social media. She rolled her eyes playfully, realizing that Didi hadn't even noticed the little exchange between her and Kelvin. "Finally," Didi muttered when Loris climbed into the taxi. "I thought you were going to leave me waiting all day." Loris smiled, shaking her head as the taxi pulled away from the eatery. She knew Didi wasn't one to linger on things or people for too long. But Loris also knew that somehow she would end up being the bridge between her friend and Kelvin. But whether Didi would give him a chance was another matter entirely. The next morning, Loris woke up early, excited but nervous to begin her new role at the company she had been posted to. With Didi's directions in mind, she navigated the unfamiliar streets of Abuja and eventually found her way to the office. Upon arrival, the staff welcomed her warmly and introduced her to the team. To her relief, everyone seemed friendly and easy to talk to, making it easier for her to blend in. However, the day turned out to be more exhausting than she expected. Adjusting to the new environment, meeting deadlines, and getting familiar with all her duties left her drained. By the time work ended that day, Loris was eager to get home. She made her way to the road, hoping to catch a taxi quickly. As she stood there waiting, she pulled out her phone to call Didi and see if she was home. Just as she was about to dial, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. Startled, Loris instinctively stepped away from the vehicle, certain that no one she knew owned a car. apart from Didi, especially in Abuja. But to her surprise, Kelvin stepped out of the driver's seat, wearing a wide grin. "Hi," he greeted warmly. Loris smiled back in recognition. "Oh, it's you," she said, feeling a little embarrassed by her earlier suspicion. "I was honking at you, but you did not respond," Kelvin said. "I'm so sorry about that," Loris replied sheepishly. "I did not think it could be anyone I knew." Kelvin smiled in his usual calm manner and offered to give her a lift home. "Oh no, it's fine," Loris said quickly. She was not used to accepting favors so easily, especially from someone she did not know too well. Kelvin tilted his head, still smiling. "You haven't given me any feedback about Didi yet. So, how about you hop in and tell me how it's going while I drive you home?" Loris hesitated briefly, unsure of what to say, but eventually climbed into the car. It felt like refusing at this point would have been rude, especially after he had gone out of his way to stop for her. "So, how's Didi?" Kelvin asked with a hopeful look as they drove through the streets. "She's fine," Loris answered simply, unsure of how much she should say. "Do you work close by?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Yes," Loris responded. "My workplace is very close to the road where you picked me." "Great! Mine isn't far from there either," Kelvin said with enthusiasm. Then, as if struck by a brilliant idea, he added, "How about this? I'll give you a lift home every day after work. We finish around the same time, so it makes sense." Loris shook her head gently. "You don't have to do that," she said kindly. "Didi is, well, she has a mind of her own. Convincing her won't be easy, and I would hate to feel like I owe you anything if it doesn't work out between the two of you." Kelvin smiled at her honesty. "I get that, but look, you don't owe me anything, and if Didi turns me down, I won't hold it against you. I just enjoy talking with you. So, how about this? If I happen to see you on the way home, I'll give you a lift. No pressure." Loris thought about it for a moment, then nodded quietly. "Okay, that's fair." When they reached her apartment complex, Kelvin pulled over at the gate, and Loris thanked him sincerely as she opened the door to get out. "Anytime," Kelvin said warmly. "And don't worry, I'll leave Didi to make up her mind on her own. I just hope I can count on you to put in a good word for me." Loris gave him a small smile. "I'll try." And with that, she made her way up to her apartment. Feeling a little conflicted, but mostly relieved. Kelvin seemed genuine, but she knew Didi well enough to understand how hard it could be to convince her to give anyone a chance. As Loris reached the door, she glanced back briefly, watching Kelvin's car drive off into the evening traffic. When she entered the apartment, Didi was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. "You're back," Didi said without looking up, a warm smile on her face. Loris shook her head with a small laugh, already accustomed to Didi's carefree nature. As she dropped her bag and settled in, "Guess who dropped me off just now?" she said, trying to sound as casual as she could. Didi looked blank. She could not think of anyone they knew in Abuja. I can't guess, she replied quietly. Kelvin, Loris said and waited to see her friend's reaction. But Didi looked totally uninterested. Thank God he had a car at least, she said sarcastically. Come on, Didi. That guy really likes you, and I think you should give him a chance. Please, Didi interrupted. I've made it clear to him that I am not interested. There are millions of girls in Abuja. Tell your friend to look elsewhere. This beauty you see here, she said, proudly admiring herself, is not for people like him. Haba, Didi. You don't even know that guy very well. How come you are so quick to jump into conclusions about him? I don't care, Loris. I don't care, Didi replied sharply. She wasn't one to take advice from anyone, not even her best friend. And so Loris decided to let her be. Saturdays were for flexing for Didi. She hummed quietly, dancing around the room as she picked out her outfits. Loris smiled, continuing her regular Saturday cleaning, amused by Didi's energy. That day, Didi had done her best to convince Loris to come with her, but Loris declined. And within a few minutes, Didi was out of the door, her car speeding off as Loris finished her chores. Once done, she headed to the nearby grocery store, walking at a relaxed pace. She grabbed a basket and began moving from aisle to aisle, selecting items on her list. Just as she reached for a carton of milk, a sudden loud noise startled her. She jumped, almost dropping the milk, her heart racing. When she turned, it was Kelvin, grinning mischievously. Kelvin! She gasped, trying to catch her breath. You scared me! He chuckled, clearly proud of his prank. Sorry, I thought you saw me. I didn't know you'd get so spooked. Loris smiled, shaking her head. So, how do you feel now, after freaking me out? Honestly, nothing special, Kelvin said with a shrug, still grinning. Sorry, that was childish. Loris laughed softly. Are you stalking me now? Please, don't tell me you are, just to get more information about Didi, because how am I bumping into you almost everywhere? Kelvin raised his eyebrows. Seriously, you think I'd follow you around just for that? He gave her a playful but defensive look. I just happened to be here. You really think I'd go that far? And besides, I saw you walk in just now. Kelvin moved to a nearby shelf and grabbed several packs of kilishi. He caught her curious glance. You've never had this before? He asked, holding it up. Loris shook her head, eyeing the packs. What is that? It's kilishi, dried spiced beef jerky. Trust me, you'll love it, Kelvin said confidently, tossing 6 packs into his basket and giving her one. Here, this one's on me. Try it and let me know what you think. At the counter, Loris watched as Kelvin paid for both their items, despite her protests. You really don't have to, she insisted. Kelvin smiled warmly. Don't worry, it's not because of Didi or anything. Loris chuckled. Thank you, Sir Kelvin, she teased. Sir Kelvin, he laughed. By the way, I don't even know your name. I've just been calling you Didi's friend this whole time. Loris, she replied, smiling. Lawrence, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. That sounds good. At least I know your name now. As they left the store, Kelvin offered to drop her off again since they lived in the same neighborhood. But Lawrence declined, shaking her head. No, you've done enough already. And besides, we'll probably bump into each other again tomorrow, she added with a light smile. Kelvin grinned. You're probably right. With that, they parted ways. Lawrence walking home with a small smile on her face, wondering if she'd see Kelvin again soon. Later that evening, Didi burst through the door, her arms loaded with goodies, her face glowing with excitement. Lawrence, I'm so happy. You can't imagine the joy this new guy is bringing to my life. Lawrence glanced up, smirking. Sounds more like what he's bringing to your wallet. Didi laughed, tossing her hair back. Fine. You already know me too well. But I kinda like him, though not that much, she said with a wink. Lawrence listened, nibbling on her kilishi. Her eyes darted towards Didi when she noticed the sudden silence. Wait, Didi gasped, eyeing the meat in Lawrence's hand. Is that kilishi? Lawrence grinned mischievously. Ah, you are wicked, Didi exclaimed, laughing. Here I am, pouring out my heart, and you are busy, watching it all alone. I'm not giving you any, Lawrence teased, pulling the kilishi closer. Why? Didi pouted dramatically. Because, Lawrence leaned in, lowering her voice. You might fall for the love potion in it. Guess who bought it? Didi raised an eyebrow. Well, since you don't have a boyfriend, you obviously bought it yourself. So, hand it over, she said, trying to snatch it from her. Lawrence smiled, pulling back. Actually, I bumped into Kelvin at the grocery store, and he bought the kilishi for me and even paid for all my groceries. Isn't he generous? Very generous, Didi agreed, narrowing her eyes playfully, but not as generous as the guy who bought all these goodies, she said, gesturing proudly at her bags. Come on, Didi. You would actually love this guy once you get to know him. Just give him a chance. You keep playing hard to get, and before you know it, one of these Abuja girls will just snatch him away, Lawrence said, rolling her eyes. Didi laughed dramatically. If this guy is as nice as you are projecting him to be, why don't you keep him for yourself before these so-called Abuja girls snatch him away? As a matter of fact, you are single to stupor. Lawrence shook her head, laughing. I'm not interested. Didi smirked, quickly catching the kilishi from Lawrence. You are not interested, but you want to force him down my throat, she teased, bolting across the room. Didi, Lawrence screamed, grabbing a pillow and throwing it at her. Give it back. Didi cackled, running away with the stolen kilishi, her laughter filling the room as Lawrence chased after her. The days continued to go by, and the girls continued their daily activities as usual. Lawrence did not know how to tell Kelvin about Didi's rejection, so she did her best to avoid him totally. But this particular day had been a grueling work day. Lawrence had felt sick all day long, barely managing to keep herself together. She paced around, hoping the hours would pass faster. By the time her shift ended, her body was begging for rest. She managed to make her way to the roadside, sluggish and drained, waiting for a taxi. Her legs felt like lead, and she could barely keep herself upright. Just as she was about to squat down, too exhausted to stand, a familiar car pulled up beside her. Kelvin quickly stepped out, concern etched on his face. Without hesitation, he helped her into the passenger seat. "Thank you," Loris whispered, her voice barely audible. Kelvin nodded and sped off, heading straight to her apartment. Suddenly, a sharp pain twisted in her stomach. She clutched her abdomen, trying to hold it in, her hand flying to her mouth to stop what was coming. But the nausea was too much. Loris couldn't hold it back. She vomited several times, her body convulsing with each wave, drenching the seat in Kelvin's car. Kelvin, realizing things were serious, turned the car around and drove straight to the nearest hospital. Loris was admitted immediately, and Kelvin handled all the payments without hesitation, rushing from one desk to the next. When he finally returned to check on Loris, Didi was already sitting by her side. She looked up at him and said calmly, "Hi. Thanks for helping my friend." Kelvin barely acknowledged her. "It's fine," he replied, his attention fully on Loris. He rushed to her side, touching her forehead gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Loris smiled weakly, trying to ease his worry. "Better," she murmured, though still exhausted. Kelvin teased her lightly. "You know, you owe me a serious car wash after what you did back there." Loris chuckled softly. "I'm so sorry," she said, still smiling. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." The two of them shared a brief moment of light-hearted banter, their connection clear. Didi watched from the side, a flicker of jealousy tightening in her chest. She hadn't realized they were this close. The way Kelvin cared for Loris before she even arrived made her feel as though she had missed something. She studied him from head to toe. Kelvin wasn't bad-looking at all, and now seeing him up close, she noticed things she hadn't before. As he left the room and walked downstairs, Didi followed him with her eyes. It was only when he got into his car, a sleek Range Rover, that she really paid attention. She had always dated men who spent lavishly on her, but they rarely offered the genuine care she saw in Kelvin. She had overheard from the nurses that Kelvin had carried Loris into the hospital in his arms, desperate to get her help. The kind of care was something her past relationships had always lacked. Suddenly, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had overlooked something important. She found herself considering Kelvin in a way she hadn't before. After being discharged from the hospital, Loris took some time to rest at home before returning to work. One afternoon, a day later, as she lay on her bed, her phone rang. She picked it up and heard a familiar voice. "Hi, it's Kelvin." Loris smiled, surprised. "Now, you're not just a stalker. How did you get my number?" she asked, half jokingly. "You know, you should really put locks on your phone," he teased back. Loris laughed softly. "I think I have dementia or something. Whenever I do that, I always forget." "Then maybe you should begin with a pattern." "K is fine. I'll remind you every time." Kelvin quipped, his smile almost audible through the phone. Lores was momentarily lost for words. "Thanks. I really am sorry about your car," she said quietly, still feeling guilty. "If you're truly sorry, you owe me a debt," Kelvin replied playfully. Lores chuckled, though her body still felt a bit tired. "Alright, what do you want?" There was a brief pause. "You," Kelvin said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Look, I know this sounds crazy and the Didi situation was real, but somehow I've found myself thinking about you more and more. I don't know when it started, but it's there." Lores stayed silent. She wasn't sure how to respond. She knew she felt comfortable around Kelvin, that his presence had a way of calming her. But was this right? Didi had already said she did not like him romantically. But was it fair for Lores to consider his feelings? The silence stretched between them. Lores' thoughts raced, unsure of what she wanted or how to respond to Kelvin's unexpected confession. Kelvin broke the silence. "I know this is sudden, and I probably startled you with all this, but I had to say it. I'll come see you tomorrow and I'll call you tonight. Please, just pick up the phone." With that, the call ended, leaving Lores in a swirl of emotions. Unsure of where things were heading, but feeling something undeniable growing between them. From that day, Lores found herself spending more time with Kelvin. They talked on the phone for long hours and could not seem to get enough of each other. This did not go well with Didi when she noticed. She was surprised at how much care Kelvin was showing Lores and how happy they were with each other. Plus, the fact that Kelvin was even wealthier than he looked. In fact, he owned his own company right there in Abuja and a few houses too. Kelvin, on his own part, spared no expense and spent lavishly on Lores. Didi started becoming agitated. As a matter of fact, since that day at the hospital, Didi's attitude towards Lores had shifted drastically. She began acting cold, brushing Lores off whenever she tried to talk, and her attitude had not gone unnoticed. One evening, Lores decided she needed answers. She cornered Didi in their apartment, determined to find out why her friend had been so distant. "You are a hypocrite, Lores," Didi snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "You said you were not interested in him." "In who?" Lores asked, genuinely confused about where the conversation was heading. "Kelvin," Didi yelled, her face flushed with frustration. Lores had never seen her friend this mad before. "But you rejected him, Didi," Lores replied, trying to stay calm. "Not just once, but 3 times. So why are you angry at me?" "Because you did not give me time to process my feelings, and you didn't even tell me he was rich." Didi spat. "You ran to him like some desperate whore." Lores stepped back, shocked at the harshness of her words. "Didi, calm down. I'm trying to understand. Why is everything always about money to you?" She stared at Didi in disbelief, feeling like she no longer recognized her friend. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Lores went to answer it. It was Kelvin. Before Lores could react, Didi rushed over to him, her demeanor changing instantly. "Hi, Kelvin," she said, her voice sweet, a fake smile plastered on her face. Kelvin nodded and smiled politely, but noticed the tension in the room. He walked straight past her to where Lawrence was standing. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly, taking her hands in his. Lawrence, uncomfortable with the tension, gently moved his hand away, trying to avoid escalating the situation. Didi watched the exchange, fuming with jealousy. "What did she say to you to make you leave me for her?" Didi snapped, glaring at Lawrence. Kelvin glanced between them, sensing the tension getting stronger. "Let's step out for a while," he said, quietly taking Lawrence by the hand and leading her towards the door. Didi's jealousy erupted. "You're really choosing her over me? A nobody, a whore," she shouted as they were about to leave. Lawrence turned around, disbelief and hurt in her eyes. This was the second time Didi had called her a whore that evening. "Why do you keep calling me that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Isn't it true?" Didi sneered. "You used to strip in a club, or did you forget?" Lawrence stood frozen, shocked that Didi would throw her past in her face like that, in a time like this. Tears welled up in her eyes. But Kelvin didn't say a word. He gently took her hand and led her out of the apartment. As they got into his car, Lawrence could no longer hold back her tears. She cried as they drove, and Kelvin let her. He stayed quiet, giving her the space she needed. Eventually, they arrived at Kelvin's house. Lawrence sat on the couch, her eyes still red and puffy from crying. After some time, Kelvin sat beside her, trying to comfort her. "Do you feel any better?" he asked, softly patting her back gently. Lawrence wiped her eyes and looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "How are you still calm after everything Didi said?" Kelvin smiled warmly. "Your personality doesn't match the things she accused you of. I know you, Lawrence." "But she wasn't lying," Lawrence replied, her voice shaking. "I did strip in a club." Kelvin took her hand, his gaze steady. "There are always two sides to a story. Tell me your side of the story. I want to hear it from you, no one else." Lawrence took a deep breath and explained how she had worked in a club for 3 weeks to support her father's medical bills. She hadn't wanted to, but there was no other way at the time. Kelvin listened intently, then smiled. "What you did was out of love for your family. It's not like you were sleeping around for money. But even then, it was a sacrifice you had to make for the betterment of your father." "But still I worked there," Lawrence said, her voice barely audible. Didi was right. Kelvin shook his head. "And I still love you, more than ever," he said with a reassuring smile. "The first day I met you girls, I won't lie, I was attracted to Didi. You know that, of course. But then, I got the chance to know you, and I realized it was you fate was drawing me to after all. I love you, Lawrence, with all my heart, and nothing can change the way I feel about you. And I want you to know today that you will be my wife, and I'll love you forever." Lawrence looked at him, surprised by his words. His acceptance of her past made her feel even lighter. "Thank you," she whispered, a smile slowly forming on her lips. Kelvin stood up. "Why don't you stay here tonight? There are plenty of rooms." "I don't think I can," Lawrence said hesitantly. "I've never stayed over at a man's house." Kelvin teased her with a grin. "How did you even work in a club then?" They both laughed, the tension easing. For the first time, Lawrence felt truly seen and accepted by someone other than her family. They talked late into the night until they both dozed off on the couch, comfortable in each other's presence. The next morning, Lawrence called her elder sister Linda and told her everything about what had happened recently. For the first time, she confessed to working at the club. "You did nothing wrong," Linda reassured her, "and I will not judge you for it. You put yourself on the line to save Dad, and I know you are not the type to sleep around. You only did what you had to do." Linda advised her to keep her distance from Didi for a while, and Lawrence agreed. She stayed at Kelvin's house for a few more days, and those days were filled with peace. Kelvin pampered her with gifts and affection, making her feel truly cared for, all in a bid to take her mind off things. One evening, a few days later, Kelvin treated Lawrence to a surprise dinner. They were both finely dressed, and Lawrence looked so gorgeous in her red dress, she nearly took his breath away. They both sat facing each other in a fancy restaurant Kelvin had chosen specifically for this occasion. That evening wore on just as planned. They ate and talked and laughed, their joy visible to anyone who saw them. After the meal was over, Kelvin took her hands in his. "I want to show you something," he said. Lawrence smiled at him in a way that made his heart beat faster. "Okay, what is it?" He went down on his knee as he brought out a small black box from his pocket. "These past few weeks I've come to know you has been the happiest days of my life, and I believe you feel the same way. Make me happy forever. Marry me, Lawrence." Lawrence could not believe her ears. Her eyes filled up with tears. "Yes," she said, dragging him back onto his seat. "I'll marry you." The other diners clapped and cheered them on, their congratulations filling the air. The day after the proposal, Lawrence went back to their apartment, the one she shared with Didi. She needed to get her things. Kelvin had suggested that she moved in with him, but she declined his offer. She was from a Christian home and did not think it was right to move in with him until they were married. Respecting her decision, he gave her a key to one of the apartments in a building he owned right there in Abuja. When Lawrence entered the apartment, Didi was sitting on the couch, surprisingly calm. Lawrence greeted her quietly and walked straight to her room. She quickly packed her clothes and belongings into a bag, trying to avoid the tension. As she returned to the living room, she noticed Didi pacing anxiously. "Can we talk?" Didi said, her voice shaky. "I wanted to talk too," Lawrence replied, her tone soft. Before Didi could respond, Lawrence spoke again. "Didi, I want to thank you. I really don't know what I would have done without you. You cared for me when I was at my lowest, and I will never forget that. But I want you to know that I'm not living because of you, so don't blame yourself." Didi's eyes filled with a mix of regret and sadness. I'm really sorry, Lawrence. I was selfish and foolish, and I'm so ashamed of myself right now. You have been a sister to me. In fact, you have been the only sister I have in this whole wild world, and I can't imagine my life without you. She stepped closer to where Lawrence stood, and her eyes fell on the ring resting on Lawrence's finger. I see that you both are engaged now, and trust me, I'm truly happy for you. You have been through a lot and you truly deserve to be happy. Please forgive me for trying to spoil the beautiful things that you both have with my jealousy. Without warning, Lawrence took Didi in her arms. I forgive you, Didi, and I've really missed you. Didi smiled amidst her tears. Does this mean that I still get to be your chief bridesmaid? Laura smiled as she replied, I won't have it any other way. And so, the two jolly friends found their way back to each other. But this time, their bond was even stronger than it had ever been. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you are new here, welcome to our community. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button. And to support the growth of our community, please give this video a big thumbs up. If you have learned something, please let us know in the comment section. And if you know someone who needs this story, who would thoroughly enjoy it as much as you did, do not hesitate to share. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Don't forget, watch, like, share, and drop a comment. Bye.